The sky above the coalition world of Eris 9 burned a dull red, not from sunset, but from fire. Smoke rolled across the horizon in thick waves, carrying the smell of metal, fuel, and defeat. What had once been a bright, living planet was now a place of falling ash and broken lights. General Talaris stood inside the cracked command dome, staring at a tactical display that no longer showed hope. Enemy markers filled the map. Defensive lines flickered and vanished one by one. Entire cities had gone dark in the last few hours. There were no reinforcements coming, no fleets waiting beyond the stars. The war was over, everyone could feel it. For 6 long cycles, the coalition had fought the Armada. 6 cycles of retreat, sacrifice, and desperate strategy. They had thrown everything they had into the fight, advanced weapons, trained armies, even forbidden technology. None of it had been enough. The enemy learned quickly, faster than expected, faster than anyone had ever prepared for. "They've breached the southern shield," an officer said quietly. Another voice followed. "Orbital station cache is gone. Evacuation corridors are collapsing. Civilian ships are being intercepted." A slow, unstoppable ending for dozens of species who had trusted the coalition to protect them. At the far end of the room, a junior communications officer named Lirin hesitated. His hands hovered over an ancient console that almost no one remembered how to use. The device had been installed centuries ago, back when the coalition still believed in unlikely allies and distant hopes. Talaris noticed the movement. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice calm but tired. Lirin swallowed. "Sir, permission to activate an old distress channel. It reaches worlds that never answered us." Earth was known, but only barely. A distant world on the edge of mapped space. High gravity, violent weather, a species that fought among itself more than it cooperated. They had never joined the coalition, never attended councils, never asked for protection or offered help. Most records described humans as unstable, too emotional, too divided, dangerous but not powerful. "They never answered us before," someone muttered. "They never answered anyone," another added. Talaris studied Lirin's face. The officer was young, far too young to be standing in a room like this at the end of a civilization, yet there was something steady in his eyes. "Why Earth?" Talaris asked. Lirin took a breath. "Because they survive things that should kill them. Because their world trained them to endure. And because they might come even if they don't have to." The ancient system hummed to life, its lights flickering as it powered up. The signal was simple, no long explanation, no request for alliance, just the truth. "We are losing, our people are dying. If anyone hears this, help us." The enemy advanced deeper into the planet's core regions. Coalition ground forces fell back again and again, fighting not to win but to slow the inevitable. Cities became battlefields, skies filled with debris and fire. The once proud defense fleet was reduced to scattered wrecks and desperate skirmishes. Talaris watched the displays with hollow eyes. He issued orders because it was his duty, not because he believed they mattered anymore. Then a sensor officer spoke, confusion clear in their voice. "Sir, we're detecting movement." And another, they were small, too small, not capital ships, not carriers, not anything that made sense. "Are those probes?" someone asked. "Too fast," the sensor officer replied. "They're entering at extreme velocity." They came straight in. Alarms rang across enemy channels as defensive fire filled space. Energy beams and missiles tore through the void, but the objects slipped through gaps, using speed and strange trajectories that made targeting difficult. Then they hit atmosphere. From the surface, civilians and soldiers alike looked up in confusion as streaks of fire tore across the sky. Not enemy bombardment, not falling debris, something else. "They're dropping," a ground commander whispered, "from orbit." Tall figures, armored, moving with purpose. Humans. Coalition soldiers stared in disbelief as the newcomers advanced without hesitation. Their armor was scarred before the first shots were fired, marked by heat and reentry burns. Their weapons were compact, brutal, and efficient. They did not shout. They did not signal for support. They moved. Enemy forces reacted too late. Human units closed distance fast, using rubble, wreckage, and even enemy fire as cover. They fought in gravity that crushed most species, in air filled with toxins and smoke, without slowing. A coalition officer watched through a cracked viewport as a human leapt from a shattered structure onto an enemy walker, tearing into its systems at close range. Another human dragged a wounded coalition soldier to safety without breaking stride. "They're insane," the officer whispered. "No," another replied. "They're determined." just waves of humans falling from the sky, striking key points with terrifying accuracy. Talaris received the first direct transmission minutes later. The signal was rough, full of static, but clear enough. "This is Commander Reyes of Earth's Rapid Response Forces. We received your distress call. Hold on." For the first time in days, Talaris felt something stir in his chest. Not victory, not relief, hope. The battle was far from over. The enemy still held overwhelming numbers. Entire regions were lost, but something had changed. The war was no longer one-sided. As more human drop units hit the surface, coalition forces found themselves rallying. Soldiers who had prepared to die now found reason to fight again. Civilians hid, watched, and whispered stories that spread faster than fear. Earth had answered, and the sky was still burning. The battlefield no longer felt silent. Before the humans arrived, Eris 9 had known only the sounds of loss, distant explosions, collapsing towers, retreat signals, and the low hum of enemy engines that never seemed to stop. Now the noise had changed. It was sharper, faster, more focused. Coalition soldiers watched from shattered cover as human units pushed forward through areas that had been marked as non-survivable. Streets filled with smoke and debris became paths instead of traps. Enemy strongpoints that had held for days collapsed within minutes. The humans did not fight like anyone the coalition had seen before. They advanced in small groups, moving independently yet never alone. Each soldier seemed aware of the others without speaking. Hand signals replaced shouted orders. Short bursts of motion replaced long exchanges of fire. When one unit stalled, another appeared from an angle no one had thought possible. Captain Sorrel, a coalition ground commander, crouched behind a collapsed wall with two of his remaining soldiers. His unit had been reduced from 80 to 9 in less than a day. He expected the humans to pass them by, focused on their own objectives. Instead, a human knelt beside him. The human's armor was scratched and blackened, but intact. A faint blue light glowed along the suit's joints. The visor reflected fire and movement, hiding the eyes behind it. "Enemy armor ahead," the human said calmly, voice clear through the chaos. "We'll take point, you follow and secure." The human stood before Sorrel could answer, already signaling to their team. Moments later, controlled explosions shook the enemy line, not random destruction but targeted strikes. The armored enemy vehicles stalled, then fell silent. Sorrel rose slowly, disbelief mixing with instinct. "Move," he ordered his soldiers. His voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. Across the planet, similar scenes unfolded. Enemy commanders struggled to adjust. Their doctrine relied on overwhelming force, predictable enemy behavior, and fear. Humans did not behave predictably. They charged where others would retreat. They fought hardest when surrounded. They used damaged terrain as advantage instead of obstacle. Captured enemy communications revealed confusion spreading through their ranks. These units do not withdraw. Fear, something the enemy had rarely experienced, began to take hold. In orbit, the situation was no less chaotic. Coalition sensor crews tracked the continued arrival of human drop objects. They did not come in waves like traditional deployments. They came constantly. One here, two there, appearing over enemy supply lines, command nodes, and reinforcement routes. No large human fleet was visible. No carriers, no heavy escorts, just soldiers. General Talaris watched the data streams with narrowed eyes. "They're not reinforcing us," he realized aloud. "They're dismantling the enemy." They were unmaking the enemy's ability to fight it at all. A new transmission arrived, routed directly to Coalition Command. "This is Commander Reyes," the human voice said again. "We're not here to replace your forces. We're here to give you back the fight. Coordinate with us if you can. If not, stay clear of marked zones." "You're heavily outnumbered," he said. "Why commit so few ships?" Orbital fire intensified. Entire districts were leveled in an attempt to bury human units under rubble. Enemy commanders ordered saturation strikes, sacrificing their own positions just to deny humans access. The humans adapted again. When buildings fell, they went underground. When streets burned, they moved through rooftops and wreckage. When supply lines were cut, they scavenged, repurposed, and redistributed enemy equipment. Coalition soldiers began copying them. At first, it was small things, shorter movements, tighter formations. Then it became bolder, joint attacks, shared cover. Coalition units found themselves fighting alongside humans, learning by watching rather than being taught. Private Kell, a young coalition infantry soldier, followed a human squad through a destroyed transit tunnel. His breathing was heavy, his hands shaking. He had never expected to live this long. The human ahead of him noticed and slowed slightly. "First time pushing forward after a retreat?" the human asked. Kel nodded. "You'll get used to it," the human said. "Fear doesn't disappear. You just stop letting it decide." Stories passed from shelter to shelter. They fell from the sky. It was not a ship, but a device, a planet breaker capable of shattering tectonic stability and rendering worlds lifeless. Enemy fleets formed a protective ring around it. Coalition command detected the energy buildup immediately. "They're going to end this," an officer whispered. "One strike." "All units prepare for catastrophic impact," he ordered, though he knew preparation meant little against such a weapon. Before despair could fully return, a human signal cut through the channel. "We see it," Reyes said. Talaris stared at the display. "You can't reach it in time, our fleets are gone." Reyes's answer was quiet. "Volunteers." Coalition sensors struggled to track them. "They're launching themselves at the weapon," an aide said in disbelief. "Yes," Talaris said softly, "they are." On the surface, Coalition forces felt the shift even before they saw it. Enemy fire faltered. Coordination broke. Confusion spread. Something was happening above them. Kel looked up through a break in the clouds and whispered, "They're still fighting even up there." And the war once lost was now balanced on a knife's edge. The inside of the enemy weapon was not made for living beings. It was a hollow structure of dark metal and pulsing energy veins stretching for kilometers. Gravity shifted without warning. Walls curved into ceilings. Heat surged in waves, then vanished into cold. Warning lights flashed in colors that meant nothing to human eyes. Human drop teams moved anyway. They had breached the outer hull using cutting charges and raw momentum, punching through layers that were never meant to be entered from the outside. Several drop frames were lost in the process, torn apart by defense fire or crushed by closing armor plates. The survivors did not slow down. Commander Reyes floated briefly as gravity failed, boots locking back onto the deck when it returned. His suit absorbed the shock, but his body still felt it. He ignored the pain and checked his team's signals. 8 green, 3 dark. He did not stop to count the cost. "Keep moving," Reyes said over the shared channel. "Timer's running." Energy readings climbed with every passing second. If it reached full output, Eris 9 would not explode all at once. It would break slowly. Continents would tear. Oceans would boil. The planet would die screaming. The enemy knew this. That was the point. Enemy defenders flooded the corridors, tall armored forms adapted for zero gravity and extreme heat. They moved with mechanical precision, weapons built to shred boarding parties in moments. The humans closed distance. They used magnetic boots to launch themselves forward, firing in short bursts, not wasting movement or ammo. When weapons failed, they used blades. When blades broke, they used mass, speed, and gravity itself. A human trooper slammed into an enemy defender, driving both of them into an energy conduit. The resulting surge killed them both and shut down half the corridor. Reyes marked the path clear and pushed on. On the surface of Eris 9, Coalition forces felt the change without knowing why. Enemy bombardment slowed. Orbital strikes lost accuracy. Some enemy units simply stopped moving, waiting for orders that never came. General Talaris noticed the pattern quickly. "They're distracted," he said. "Whatever the humans are doing, it's working." Civilians were evacuated through routes that had been sealed for days. Hope no longer whispered. It shouted. Private Kel ran with his unit through a shattered transit hub, following human signals on his visor. He no longer questioned why humans were always at the front. He only knew that when they moved, the enemy broke. A massive enemy walker emerged from smoke ahead, its weapons charging. Before anyone could retreat, a human unit dropped from above, landing directly on the machine's hull. Explosions followed. The walker collapsed in a storm of fire and metal. Kel stared, breathless. "They don't stop," he said. "No," his sergeant replied. "They don't." They were heading inward, toward the core, defense systems activated that had never been tested against living targets. Gravity spiked suddenly, crushing several human troopers against the deck. Others were flung into walls as the ship twisted its internal fields. Reyes's suit screamed warnings. He shut most of them off. "Split into pairs," he ordered. "Hit every control node you see. If you can't disable it, overload it." The core was a sphere of blinding light, suspended in a web of rotating rings and energy arcs. It hummed with power that made the air vibrate. Even with suit filters, breathing was difficult. Enemy elites stood guard around it, larger, heavier, armed with weapons meant to end battles instantly. The humans charged. The fight was brutal and close. There was no cover, no room for long-range tactics. Just motion, reaction, and will. One by one, human signals went dark. Lieutenant Park took a hit protecting a control node, her last act overloading the stabilizers. Another trooper sealed a breach manually, venting himself into space to prevent the chamber from collapsing before the core destabilized. Reyes reached the main interface with two others remaining. "Timer?" he asked. 3 minutes to full discharge, came the reply. Reyes connected his suit directly into the system, bypassing safeguards through brute force code injection. Alarms screamed as the weapon fought him. Enemy reinforcements poured in. "We won't make it out," one of the troopers said calmly. Reyes nodded. "Didn't plan to." On the surface, every living being felt it. The sky flashed white. Enemy ships shuddered. The planet itself seemed to exhale. Coalition sensors went wild. "The weapon's destabilizing," an officer shouted. "Energy spike, internal collapse." The explosion was contained, brutal, final. Then it was gone. Silence followed. Human signals vanished all at once. On Eris 9, the fighting stopped, not because orders were given, but because the enemy no longer had the will to continue. Units retreated blindly. Some surrendered. Others fled the system entirely. Coalition soldiers stood in stunned silence, looking up at a sky that no longer threatened them. Private Kell fell to his knees, shaking. He laughed, then cried, not caring who saw. "They did it," he whispered. "They actually did it." "No human signals remain," an aide said softly. The command room went quiet. "They knew," Talaris said after a long moment. "They knew exactly what they were doing." Civilians placed symbols on walls and shelters, simple marks meant to represent falling stars. Coalition soldiers spoke the word human with a new tone, one that carried respect and sorrow together. Far above the planet, debris drifted where the weapon once existed. Unseen by most, faint signals flickered. Damaged, weak, not all of them were gone. Deep within shattered compartments, a handful of human suits still clung to power, drifting amid wreckage. Emergency beacons pulsed quietly, swallowed by static and distance. On Eris 9, no one knew yet. They only knew that when the end had come close enough to touch, humanity had stepped into it instead. And the war, though not over, had been changed forever. The silence after the weapon's destruction felt heavier than the battle itself. On Eris 9, smoke still drifted through broken cities, and fires burned where no one yet had the strength to put them out. The sky was calmer now, no longer torn open by enemy fire, but the quiet carried grief. Everyone knew what that silence meant. The humans had not returned. Coalition soldiers moved slowly through reclaimed districts, stepping over wreckage and shattered armor. Some helped civilians out of collapsed shelters. Others simply sat where they were, staring at the ground, replaying the last moments of the fight in their minds. General Talaris stood at the edge of the command dome's broken balcony, looking up at the stars. The enemy fleets were retreating, scattering in disorganized jumps away from the system. Victory, by any military definition, was theirs. It did not feel like victory. "They saved the planet," an aide said quietly behind him. "Yes," Talaris replied, "they did." Human medical technology was unfamiliar, but the humans who had fought on the surface had shared enough basic knowledge before the final assault. Wounded soldiers from many species lay side by side, treated with the same care. Stories spread quickly. A human who had held a bridge alone long enough for civilians to escape. A human squad that fought until their ammunition ran out and then kept fighting anyway. A human who smiled and said, "It's fine," even while bleeding. These stories became something more than memories. They became fuel. Within hours, coalition forces regrouped fully for the first time since the war began. Commanders who had once planned only retreats now planned advances. Enemy units left behind were isolated, surrounded, and disarmed. Supply caches were captured. Communication nodes were seized. The enemy, once so certain of victory, was breaking. They had never planned for this kind of loss. Without the planet breaker, their strategy collapsed. Without centralized command, their forces fought blindly. Worse, they now believed the humans might still be coming. Fear changed sides. Private Kell stood with his unit near a human drop zone that was now nothing but scorched ground and twisted metal. He picked up a small, damaged piece of armor plating and turned it over in his hands. "They didn't have to do this," he said softly. "No," his sergeant replied. "But they chose to." "General," a sensor officer said, voice hesitant, "we're seeing intermittent signals." Rescue operations launched immediately. Coalition ships that had survived the battle moved into the debris field, deploying drones and recovery teams. The area was dangerous, unstable energy pockets, drifting metal, collapsing fragments, but no one hesitated. Hours later, the first confirmation arrived. "They're alive," a recovery officer said, barely able to keep their voice steady. "Some of them are alive." When he woke, the first thing he saw was an unfamiliar ceiling and a figure with too many limbs leaning over him. He tried to move and failed. "Easy," the medic said. "You're safe." News of the survivors spread across Eris 9 like fire through dry grass. Soldiers cheered. Civilians cried openly. The falling star symbols were joined by new ones, simple lines meant to represent hands reaching back from the darkness. The humans had not all been lost, but the war was not over. Enemy forces, though shattered, were not finished. Isolated fleets regrouped at the edge of the system, forming a final, desperate push. Without their superweapon, they turned to raw numbers and destruction. "They're preparing a counterstrike," an officer warned. "A scorched assault. They intend to leave nothing behind." The humans who remained able to fight were exhausted, wounded, or both. "We can't take another full assault like the last one," the officer added. Talaris nodded. "But we don't have to." "I won't ask you to fight." "They don't understand rest," a coalition medic muttered. "No," another replied. "They understand cost." Private Kell found himself fighting beside Commander Reyes during the final push. He watched the human commander move carefully now, slower than before, but just as determined. "Why keep going?" Kell asked during a brief pause. Reyes looked at him. "Because if we don't, they'll try this again somewhere else." Others surrendered. The war for Eris 9 was over. As the last hostile signal vanished from sensors, a new one appeared. Massive, multiple signatures entering the system from deep space. Coalition sensor crews stared in disbelief. "That's a fleet," someone whispered, "not sleek, not elegant, heavy, armored, scarred, human. Earth had arrived at last," the true response. General Talaris watched the fleet emerge from hyperspace, ships bearing marks of old battles, designs built for survival rather than beauty. He finally allowed himself to smile. The humans who had fallen from the sky had not been alone after all. They had only been first. The arrival of the human fleet changed everything, even before a single shot was fired. From the surface of Eris 9, the sky filled with shapes that blocked out the stars. They were not elegant ships. They did not shine or glide. They looked heavy, scarred, and stubborn, like they had been built to survive disasters rather than avoid them. Their hulls carried marks of old battles, repaired again and again instead of replaced. Coalition sensors struggled to count them all. "They're not forming a battle line," an officer said in disbelief. General Talaris watched carefully. "They don't need to." They had faced coalition fleets before. They had faced human warriors on the ground. They did not want to face both at once. A transmission cut through every channel in the system. It did not carry threats or demands. It was calm, steady, and unmistakably human. "This is Fleet Marshal Kane of Earth," the voice said. "Hostilities in this system are over. Power down your weapons and stand by for inspection. Any hostile action will be answered." Civilians emerged slowly from shelters, blinking in the light, unsure if it was real. Private Kell stood near the same ruined wall where he had placed the armor fragment days earlier. He looked up at the sky filled with human ships and felt something settle inside him. For the first time since the war began, he believed it was truly over. The days that followed were filled with recovery. Human fleet ships docked with coalition stations, unloading supplies, engineers, medical teams, and relief units. They moved with practiced efficiency as if this was something they had done many times before. Coalition leaders expected demands. Territory, authority, control. None came. Instead, the humans asked questions. What cities needed power first? Which regions lacked clean water? Where the injured were still trapped. General Talaris met Fleet Marshal Kane in person aboard a coalition station that still bore deep scars from the fighting. Kane was older than Talaris expected, his face marked by time and responsibility rather than anger. "You didn't have to come in force," Talaris said during their first meeting. "The enemy was already broken." "But broken things sometimes try again." Commander Reyes stood on a recovery deck overlooking the planet, supported by a railing as medics argued quietly behind him. He ignored them. "You should be resting," a human officer said. Reyes nodded. "I am just standing." The ones who had stayed behind inside the weapon. The ones whose signals had gone dark forever. He did not regret it. Neither did anyone else. Across Eris 9, memorials formed without instruction. No grand statues, no towering monuments, just small things. A piece of human armor set into a wall, a symbol painted on shelter doors, names written in chalk where cities had once stood. The Coalition did something they had never done before. They listened. Stories of Earth spread through the surviving worlds of the Coalition, not exaggerated legends, but simple truths. Humans lived on a world that tried to kill them every day. Humans fought each other, but still answered calls from strangers. Humans did not see impossible odds as a reason to surrender, only as a problem to solve. Other species began to understand something important. Humanity was not special because it was perfect. It was special because it refused to stop. Weeks later, when the last enemy presence had been removed from the system, a council was held on Eris 9. Representatives from dozens of species attended, some in person, some by projection. Human delegates stood among them, not above them. General Talaris addressed the gathering. "We were losing," he said. "Not just a war, everything, and when our hope was gone, Earth answered. You came as warriors, and then you stayed as allies." For the first time, humanity stood fully among the stars. Private Kell watched the council broadcast from a rebuilt plaza. He did not understand politics, but he understood what he was seeing. The galaxy had changed. Months later, as reconstruction continued, Eris 9 began to look like a living world again. Green returned to scorched land. Cities rose where ruins had stood. Trade routes reopened. Children played under open skies. Human ships came and went, never staying longer than needed. Before departing, Commander Reyes visited the memorial wall where the armor fragments remained. Coalition soldiers stood beside humans, silent together. Kell recognized Reyes and approached him. "Sir," he said, unsure of what else to say. Reyes nodded at the wall. "They mattered." "They still do." "Did anyone call Earth?" "Earth sent its warriors from the sky just when our hope was gone." HFY